We'll start with the prayers from the Reverend Christine from High Broughton St James's Church. Thank you.
A moment's silence, please, as we pray. Father God, I bring before you all who are present here at this meeting, the communities and individuals they represent. I thank you, Lord, that you love each and every person in this room, and that every individual is precious and special to you. I thank you for them, Lord. I give thanks for all who are willing to use their talents, times, abilities, skills and gifts in the service of others. I thank you for the families of the council members here present and the sacrifices they make so that their family members can work here for the good of others in public service. I pray that you will bless the endeavours of this council. I pray that you will grant wisdom, compassion, good judgment, clarity of thought and peace to this meeting and for those to come in the coming weeks of months. I pray for a spirit of collaboration and peace in this blessed place. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.
Thank you. If we just remain standing, please, until we have a minute's silence in remembrance of the massacre at Srebrenica. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you. I haven't been notified of any special announcements or any special business. I would like to put forward a motion with a notice from here and ask the council to agree that we swap the agenda item order by reorganising using agenda number 5 replaced by agenda number 7. Thank you. All in agreement? Thank you. Can I ask for any apologies? Okay. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Garrido. Anything else?
I'm declaring interest that I'm a board member for the stadium, so that's on the agenda later on today.
Equally, I'm a board member for the stadium.
Today is a very special occasion and we are dealing with some special circumstances. So when we ask for receipts of petitions, we will ask for one person to speak for at least 5 minutes is open to them, and then at the end of which we would ask the elected mayor if he might want to address some of the issues that we know that is on the petition. So if we just start there, and we're looking for, I believe, Kaz Jamil, who's going to be speaking on behalf of Lucy Hemming. So, Kaz, if you're going to be instructed on how to use the mic, and if you address me rather than through council, and let us know when you're finished. We'll keep a track of your time, which is 5 minutes.
Good morning. First of all, let me apologise. I've not come prepared. I was told about this yesterday. My name's Kasim Jamil. I'm here on behalf of Lucy Henning, who is Alan Henning's daughter. Since Alan Henning passed away, she suffers from anxiety. So I'm here to speak, get her point across. Since Alan passed away in such tragic circumstances, both Alan's daughter Lucy and son Adam have suffered serious complications in life. Everything's turned upside down for them. Lucy suffers from anxiety beyond belief, and Adam has severe PTSD. It's affected them, it's affected Alan's wife Barbara, and everybody. I mean, some of yourselves will know, well, everybody I'm assuming knows the story of Alan, his circumstances, etc. And it's affected people worldwide, not just people in Salford. But that's the reason I'm here. What we as people in Salford can do, or what we would like to do. I mean, a petition's been handed in today to name something after Alan. I'm hoping it's just standard procedure, because that's the least we as people can do. Alan went with me to Syria. I've done about 12 convoys to Syria. He was kidnapped while I was there. After he was kidnapped, I stayed there personally for 46 days. I had to negotiate, or tried to negotiate, put my life on the line. It was extremely hard, it was difficult, it was the most harrowing experience I've ever had. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. Just thinking about it, I was thinking about it last night after I was told I had to come, well, I was asked if I'd come in, and I was thinking about it, and it brought back a lot of harrowing memories and experiences. Whilst you're there in the situation, you will do things that if you take a step back now and think about it, you think never in a million years would I do that again. But whilst you're there and you realise how special this person was, I would do it again. Even though sometimes I see things on television and think I would never do that again, I would for him. So the reason I've come in today is I would like to put across my point as we need the absolute minimum we do, or we would like as people from Salford, as humans, is get something across, whether it's a street, an avenue, an area, a bridge, something named in Alan's name. I think that's the absolute minimum we should do. And I'd just like to know where we're at with that as well.
Kaz, thank you very much. And thank you, Lucy. I'd like to pass to the elected Mayor Dennett to be able to respond to what you've just said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm honoured that Kaz Jamil and Lucy Henning have actually joined us here in the council chamber today, and I'm really honoured to have listened to your story. And you know, it's not an easy thing to share with an audience of politicians, so from the bottom of my heart I'd just like to thank you for doing that. So on behalf of myself and the members of the council, we're proud to stand alongside you, your family, friends, and the people of Eccles and Salford as we remember your dad. Alan was a humble man who put aside his own fears to help people of all faiths in their time of desperate need and often destitution. Alan's story touched all of our hearts. It is the actions of people like Alan that should drive us to be better human beings at a time when there is so much suffering, so much poverty and persecution around the world. And with the blessing of Alan's family following his tragic death, the city's tribute to Alan's life and legacy, led by the former city mayor Ian Stewart, culminated in the opening of a memorial garden in Alan's hometown at Eccles Recreation Ground. Communities from across the city of Salford came together and launched individual Alan Henning Memorial Funds. And I know the former city mayor launched a city council memorial fund to provide financial support to Alan's children. It's been over 4 years since we lost Alan in the most tragic of circumstances. Alan will always remain in our hearts and be remembered as a proud son of Salford, who was truly a selfless and courageous man, representing the true spirit of our city of Salford. And I know I can speak from everyone here today who are in full support of naming of a principal road in the city of Salford in honour of Alan Henning. Councillor Sharmina August, along with colleague ward councillors in Eccles, has been working closely with Alan's family, I know, and also Councillor Antrobus and officers of the City Council to make this happen in the very near future. We're always here for Alan's family, and once again, I'd like to thank Kaz and Lucy for coming in today and presenting the petition to us. Alan will be forever in our hearts. He represents the true spirit of this city, and thank you so much for saying what you said. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said at the beginning, this was exceptional circumstances, and what we usually do at this point of the meeting is to accept petitions that are brought to the council and ask that the responses to the petitions are given in writing. And so I'd ask that the other petitions that are being handed in, if you make yourself known. Councillor Bellamy.
This petition is on behalf of the residents of Windmill Road in Walton.
Any other? No? We have then minutes of last meeting. Would council say that they're a proper account of the meeting of the 18th of May 2007? Thank you. We have two public questions at this meeting. The first one, I believe, is from Mrs. Carol Boyce. Could you make yourself known?
Don't start the clock yet.
Carol, thank you very much for coming to council. We look forward to your question. I'll just ask people in the public gallery to allow us to hear the questions being placed on record. Thank you. Carol, it's open.
Can you do that? Yeah, cheers. So this is the Mount Bodden Lodge. It's an over 60s club, currently with 100 members. The only club in Salford that offers such a wide range of activities: cards, snooker, keep fit, dancing, bowling, social events, day trips out and a 5-day holiday at Christmas. Ages range from 64 to 95, and it's been there and active at Monton Green since 1968.
Now the council have decided to withdraw their subsidy of just over 15,000 a year needed to keep this important community facility open, and Bodden Lodge is faced with closure. This is an elders club. The research is clear. Social isolation can be a killer. Engagement in activities outside the home is good for the mind, body and spirit. The NHS accepts social prescribing as a fundamental part of preventative medicine and recognises that elders are particularly at risk. Sadly, the days of extended families are mostly gone. An increasing number of elders find themselves alone after the death of a partner or a close friend. Research also shows use of GPs and medical facilities in this age group, not because they're ill, but because they're lonely. And in turn, that loneliness has a detrimental effect in their overall health. Bodden Lodge fits into the Salford Integrated Care Programme for older people. It's a local community group helping to keep people out of care, providing a lifeline and mitigating against loneliness and isolation. The figures are clear. The cost saving in services exceeds the amount of the council's subsidy. We should call it an investment. The Bodden Committee are grateful to councillors McCusker and August who have met with them to discuss their issues and have produced a draft business plan. Bodden members accept there need to be changes. That said, there are a number of anomalies in the business plan. Not least, section 7.1 speaks about a cash flow forecast being spread across 5 years. Yet income and expenditure show only 2 years of cash flow, and in the second year, Bodden is expected to be self-financing. Yes, an increase in membership numbers. Yes, an increase in the cost of activities. The committee has already agreed an increase in membership fees from £15 to £40 a year. It's a steep rise for elders. But the remaining shortfall in the budget relies on hiring out the building, one room, a small kitchen and toilets, in competition with other local spaces. To meet the projected income during 2020, the room will need to be rented out for the equivalent of half a day, twice a week, every week for 50 weeks of the year. In 2021, when Bodden is expected to be self-financing, 3 times a week, 50 weeks in the year. Members of the committee will be responsible for marketing, room bookings, getting the facilities ready, opening, closing, clearing up, and the logistics that rentals don't clash with existing activities. So a group whose average age is in their 80s and at a time of life when their own health or that of their partner is likely to be challenged is being asked to set up, run a business from a standing start, which has to break even by the second year. This is not to underestimate what elders are capable of, but it is to be realistic about what the council is asking them to do. The trajectory to self-financing is too steep and looks to be set up to fail. Bodden Lodge is dear to my own heart. My parents were members for many years, keeping fit with ballroom dancing. When my mum passed away, we didn't expect my dad to survive for long. They'd been childhood sweethearts, and he was lost. On her deathbed, my mum insisted he carry on being in life, and we pressured him to follow through. Eventually, he got in his car and drove back to Bodden Lodge. Bodden became his lifeline, and it kept him alive for another 9 years, dancing till he was pushing 90. So like many people here today, our family owes a debt of gratitude to Bodden Lodge. Salford signed up as an age-friendly city. Bodden Lodge is a community asset, and the service given to our community by any measure you care to use saves the council more than the subsidy. Putting this facility at risk with no safety net in place to save such a small amount of money is short-term gain for long-term pain. We're asking the council to go back to the drawing board and find a way to support this valuable community asset that has been saving the council money for the last 50 years. There's a petition for Mayor Dennett here. At the last count this morning, over 2,250 people from the local area in support of Bodden Lodge. The councillor's business plan notwithstanding, our question is still, what are Salford City Council going to do to ensure Bodden Lodge Over 60s Club can continue to serve the older people of Salford and make positive contributions to their health, well-being and social support networks? Thank you.
Carol, thank you very much for coming to council and asking a question. I will hand over to the elected city mayor to... I'll ask the elected mayor if he will respond or indicate which member of his cabinet is going to respond to your question. Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to invite Councillor Lancaster to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, for inviting me to answer this question. I'm more than happy to answer the question. And I think I need to put some facts to the council which they need to be well aware of. Firstly, I was a member of the council in Eccles when built Bodden Lodge. I can know it well. And the building construction was by Vic Hallam. The timber frame construction which was guaranteed for 50 years. That 50 years was done by the City Council, and the lease was tied up till after the 50 years, the building would go back to the Unitarian Church, who owned the land, not the building. So the building as such now is owned by the Unitarian Church, not by the City Council. That was transferred under the lease arrangement that they would be given to them after 50 years. So we're now talking about the revenue situation of running the facility. I know it well. I can tell you very well what it does. My mother was a member there, and I used to drop her off every Friday night to Bodden Lodge for years to actually go there, and we got a lot of support from Bodden Lodge, and so did many thousands and hundreds of people in Eccles over the years have benefited from Bodden Lodge. So nobody needs in this council convincing of the benefit of Bodden Lodge, and no councillor in this council chamber has ever proposed to terminate the arrangement with Bodden Lodge if a lease could be sorted out. We in fact met, I'm told the officers met with the petitioners along with the ward councillors, and we asked for looking at the revenue costs of running the Bodden Lodge. Now Bodden Lodge wasn't taken in isolation. This was done to every community building in the city, where we looked at the cost of operation, the revenue costs of running those facilities. And Bodden Lodge was currently costing £20,000 of revenue costs to actually run it per year. Nothing to do with the fabric of the building, purely about the running costs. So we asked to look at a system of how we can reduce those costs, and every other community committee were done the same. That was the beginning of in January that meeting took place. And the promise was made that they would work with the City Council to actually look at how we can reduce that cost. We talked about a business plan, or the lady suggested a business plan being drawn up. We were promised a business plan. As of yesterday, and I checked at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, City Council haven't received, or I haven't received a copy of the business plan. That was the information I was told. I'm waiting for the business plan to see what they can achieve. No decision has been made to actually close that facility. We also know that with 20,000 this year, CVS has managed to secure £10,000 towards the 20,000 deficit in this year. And we've put in a further 5,000 as a temporary maintenance, some maintenance work which needed doing as well. So a commitment that I've got, well, I can't speak louder than the mic tells me, but I'm quite happy to meet with Bodden Lodge representatives to explain if they haven't understood the where the system goes. Nobody said that you've got to find, or the council hasn't said you've got to find 20,000 in total. What it's asked for is a clear business plan how we can reduce the costs like every other building in the City Council community facility. To say that Bodden Lodge is the only place where this facility is done, a lot of the community committees have actually funded. In my ward alone in Winton, we've just taken over the residents group have the running of the community centre on Westwood Park. And we've been told exactly the same situation. And we have to look at reducing the council's contribution. Sorry, Linda. All I'm saying is the activities they do is substantial. And we owe a lot in this City Council. We owe a lot in this City Council to community groups for what they do in this city. They support the community in many ways. And on top of that, there's a lot of the courses which operate for elderly people and events that which happen in those community buildings help to say them as community help to save the council's expenses and also make sure that the service we provide to the communities of Salford is far better than we could do with just doing the council alone. We believe in true partnership, and that partnership should be the city council and residents. And if they consulted me on this, I'd have made it quite clear. No decision has been taken as yet, but there's a lot to overcome. First thing to overcome is how you talk to the church about what their lease arrangement on the building, are they prepared to lease it back to us? We could not guarantee another 50 years on that building, because I know the construction of the Callan building, and with more than about 5 or 10 years is the maximum we could give life of that building. So the contribution which the church was making, as a discussion with the church, sorry? So the decisions about with the church are quite crucial about the future use of the building. However, we have also been told that the church themselves have offered the community buildings next to the church for their use, but I'm not saying that should be the case of what you do. What I believe is all efforts should be made to save Borden Lodge and to ensure that we can work with the public to make sure it's a building fit for the community for a number of years to come.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. Carol, thank you very much, and you've got your answer to your question, but is there anything from what you've heard in that answer that you'd like to ask a question? It's solely on the answer you've been provided with.
So I'm really glad that the council fully understands the importance of Borden Lodge. Just to correct something, I think that Borden Lodge is the only one in Salford offering such a wide range of facilities and activities. I believe, according to the ward councillors who were involved with Borden Lodge committee, the church is open to negotiation on the lease. According to the business plan, which you say you haven't received, Borden Lodge received a copy on Thursday and were pressed to make some decisions about it. So you need to ask your ward councillors for a copy of the business plan. And you're saying it's over 20,000. That is not in the business plan. The business plan says that currently, including £6,000 for maintenance, which is yet to be done, the council put in almost £16,000 this year. So I think that there's some misunderstandings. I think that, yes, of course, the council should work with local residents. Borden Lodge committee are open to that, but only if they see that there's something sensible being put on the table. And as I've said before, asking a group of average age 80-year-olds to run a business, basically a business, from a standing start, it's just, I mean, it's borderline ludicrous in a way. So I'm glad to see that you're thinking that you might be able to.
Thank you, Carol. You need to wind up now. You're coming to the end of your time.
You can speak for no longer than 5 minutes. So my question is, I feel a certain amount of animosity in this room, which is quite interesting since you're also on board with Borden Lodge. So yes, I would like to know how this is all going to come together. The councillors who produced the business plan have not communicated with you because you're still waiting to see it. So there's some breakdown somewhere. And I'm very glad, I'm reiterating in public, that you're saying that you want to save Borden Lodge. Yes. The committee are willing to work with you. They're already making massive changes about how their finance is structured, which doesn't involve running a business.
Councillor Lancaster, would you like to come back to that, please?
Well, I can't be clearer. I made it very clear when the residents came to my surgery some months ago that I was wanting to save Bodden Lodge when we were told the original discussions were talking about closure. And I made a commitment at that time that I would do our utmost to make sure it didn't happen. There's no decision of this council to close Bodden Lodge. And I make it clear I'll do my utmost to maintain Bodden Lodge as a facility for the ex-Salford and Eccles residents. I've got to emphasise and reiterate what I've said. It's not Bodden Lodge does a great job, a fantastic job. There's no arguments about that. But so does a lot of other community facilities within this city. And we ought to congratulate them what they do. Now, I want to emphasise, nobody's saying to Bodden Lodge, make it quite clear so you understand what I'm saying. I'm saying it's cost us 20,000 a year to contribute to the running costs. That's the office's, this is my report, and so I'll give you a copy of this report, which I'm saying now. But you're talking about your business plan says 15,000. Does it really matter? Let me say.
Excuse me. Thank you, Carol. You've had it. Councillor Lancaster, will you take your seat, please? Will you take your seat, please? Thank you. Carol, thank you very much. You've asked your question, you've got your answer. You have got an offer to be able to meet with Councillor Lancaster and take it further. Thank you very much for your question. The second question that we have...
As I understand it, Ceremonial Mayor, is that when a question has been asked, there was a supplementary question asked, I thought that Councillor Lancaster has a reasonable amount of time to respond. I'm sure everybody would want to hear his answer.
Councillor Merrick, Councillor Lancaster has responded. He had an adequate amount of time to respond. We've got that on the agenda and we're moving on. We'll go back to the second question as being a question that's offered by Mr. Paul Wilson. Can you make yourself to the mic, please? Thank you. Mr. Wilson, you have 5 minutes to ask your question and you will get a response at the end of your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the Council. Elected members may remember back in January, the full Council meeting on the 16th, that Mr. Roy Harding asked a question about on behalf of a large group of Swinton residents. His question was, Swinton and Pendlebury is one of 2 areas in Salford that presently do not have community committees. Will the Council commit to working with interested local groups, organisations to re-establish as soon as possible in 2019 the Swinton and Pendlebury Community Committee, allowing local residents... I'll pause while members of the public leave the gallery. Okay, the question was, will the Council work to re-establishing the Community Committee in 2019, allowing local residents once again to become more actively involved in their community? You may remember the City Mayor passed this over to Councillor Tracy Kelly. She responded with her pre-prepared response. She said there would be a meeting in June to discuss the issue reinstating the Community Committee for Pendlebury and Swinton. She never made contact with Mr. Harding after that, nor did anyone else. Mr. Harding set up a meeting with Andrew Meadows, the neighbourhood manager for Swinton, on the 31st of January. Andrew Meadows said the Community Committee had stopped because of lack of interest. That is true. The minutes do show that the Community Committee numbers had dwindled, but there had been no attempt to revive the Community Committee. Roy explained to Andrew Meadows why the Community Committee was important and how it could work well for so many groups in the future. Andrew said he had no problem with that, but they should wait until the meeting on the 22nd, in June. June was the time when this would be reviewed. He said, let's see how the networking meeting goes. Roy agreed to wait till then, which seemed fair enough. He was keen to get an agreement on something as soon as possible. He knew these things take time and had asked the question in January. Andrew said that if necessary, the Swinton South Community Committee could be formed rather than a Swinton and Pendlebury, if the other areas weren't interested in joining. Mr Harding rightly expected that there would be a discussion about that networking event about the Community Committee. I attended that event. No discussion took place as part of the agenda. There were pre-prepared presentations, and as soon as those was finished, most of the councillors disappeared in a puff of smoke. Not wanting to let this important issue go and not be pushed into the long grass, Miss Boyce and myself asked about the Community Committee at the networking event. Now, I should say this networking event was held at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when most people work, so you can imagine the numbers there weren't particularly great. Well, council officers and councillors outnumbered the public greatly. We asked, could it be held? Andrew Meadows said it was down to ward councillors. There hasn't been any further communication from the council since then. We did ask the ward councillors and met with 2 of the Swinton South councillors. They assured us that they would be looked into. We're still waiting for that reply. On the 4th of July, Carol Boyce emailed Andrew Meadows and asked about the progress of the Community Committee. And his response was, in terms of future community meetings, it has been agreed by ward members in Swinton and Pendlebury neighbourhood to continue with annual networking events and not to hold community committees. Well, I tell you, annual networking events are not good enough for the people of Swinton South. We have very important issues in Swinton South. We've got planning permission being granted for over 200 homes on Bellway in Campbell Road site. There's a pre-application gone in for over 1,000 homes on the golf sites. There's also a rising crime, antisocial behaviour. And to say that there isn't time to do that, well, it's not good enough. There are numerous issues that we need to have in a community committee. There are numerous issues that we have to discuss in public. We're disappointed that the council and ward councillors have failed the community committee at this time. If you're any doubt that community committees are valid, we get at our resident meetings between 100 and 300 people to attend. That shows you there is a strength for meetings in Swinton. So, my question to the City Mayor, and not a councillor you want to delegate this to, because we've done this before and we're now 6 months later, why have ward councillors, the council and neighbourhood manager not facilitated the reinstatement of the community committee as promised, so that residents of Swinton South, like other wards in the city, have a community committee that meets in the evenings at least every other month? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Wilson, for your question. We will follow the Constitution and Council. I will refer to the Mayor and he will refer to the person best qualified to answer your detailed question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I bring in the lead member for neighbourhoods who has responsibility for this area of the council business within my cabinet? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. However, you state that I didn't get back in contact with regards to the question asked in January of this year. That was then delegated, as you just rightly said, to the neighbourhood manager, Andrew Meadows, who has dealt with this on behalf of myself and the council. The group did meet again in June for the neighbourhood network, and I've been informed that there was about 50 people that attended that meeting. And it was agreed by the councillors of Swinton and Pendlebury that they will carry on with networking and not a community committee, because they felt that they were represented at community committee meetings. However, there are other ways that people can contact and have discussions with regards to community groups, and that is through their councillors. And I know some councillors still hold ward surgeries, however they are all answerable by email or by telephone, and those conversations can be had. So So the decision has been taken by those councillors that the meetings will not be going back to community committee meeting, and it's not true that all areas have community committee meetings. There are other areas across the city that do not hold community committee meetings and have a similar setup of the networking sessions, and it's felt that they work in those particular areas. Hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. If you have a subsequent question based only on the answer you've received, we'd be happy to take it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do have a subsequent question. Councillor Kelly said that 50 people attended the event. I can tell you for a fact there was 18 members of the public there, including myself. There were 23 councillors and council officers there. So you get close to 50, but over half of those were down to being paid to be there. Other ways to get involved with community committees, we want a public meeting. We want to have a forum where we can listen to what's happening. We don't accept that meeting individual people trying to arrange individual meetings with councillors warrants what Salford's motto is. The welfare of the people is the highest law. The welfare of Swinton people should be respected, and we should have a community committee. It's not true that we said that every community has a community committee. We know there are other communities out there that don't have them. There is an appetite, and we ask that this is revisited urgently because we have urgent issues within Swinton South, and would like to meet, Miss Boyce and myself would like to meet with the ward councillors, yourself and the city mayor to discuss this and actually reinstate community committees as soon as possible, because we need to have a platform where large groups of people can listen and get a coherent message and engage with our council. We're at a time now where politicians are at an all-time low nationally. People don't respect politicians. People are not engaged with politicians. We want to meet with our politicians, so we ask that you could set up a meeting within a...
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Mr. Wilson. Councillor Kelly, do you want to respond?
Just say, Paul, you said you've got issues within a specific area of the ward, so I'm sure your local councillors will be happy to meet on those issues. I don't think it's a place for the community committee.
That's right.
Community committee is apolitical. It's not political. So if the councillors of that particular ward where you've got your issues, and I'm happy to attend as well, and if the mayor is needed, which, you know, taking him out of a busy schedule, but if it's an issue that you feel is not being addressed by this council, then I suggest we do have a meeting with your fellow councillors, and I'm happy to attend as neighbourhood lead, but it's not for the community committee if it's an issue that needs resolving within the council.
Well done.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, you've had your answer. There's an offer to meet with the councils outside the community committee, and thank you very much for putting it to the council. Thank you. We're moving on to item 8 of the agenda, and I'd like to hand over to the returning officer to talk about the results of the European elections and the local election. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report under item 8 is for noting results of the European election, which seems a number of months ago now, but also the election of the Walkden South Councillor, and we'd like to welcome Councillor Joshua Brooks to this chamber.
Thank you. This might be the time to say, Joshua, welcome. And we hope you enjoy your time in council. I'd like now to ask the City Mayor to talk to us about the appointments to the different cabinet members and the wider mayoral teams. After which I'll ask anybody that wants to ask the Mayor a question. Thank you. Over to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. I wasn't necessarily going to speak to this paper. I mean, I've updated members of the council on the amendments to the mayoral team and roles and responsibilities within it. So I will move the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that Acceptable. Any questions? No? Acceptable? Thank you. I'll ask the Mayor again. To present the revised membership of the Definite Scrutiny Committees and panels in principal year 19 and 20.
Again, I know we didn't manage to fill all vacancies at the annual general meeting of the council, so this is an updated version of that, so I move the report for your attention. Thank you.
Any questions to the Mayor? Councillor Turner.
I haven't got any questions, Chair, to the Mayor at this stage. Just a couple of items to fill things in. The Lowry Committee on the panels, we would like to put Councillor Karen Garrido to that, and also Councillor Gillian Collinson on the SACRE, and that would fill the vacancies that are there for us. Thank you very much.
Licensing.
We haven't got licensing.
Councillor Turner, thank you very much. Anybody else? No? With those amended names, can we agree to accept the report that's been offered to us? We'll move now to item 11 and representative to outside bodies. And again, City Mayor, over to you.
Can I move the report for everyone's attention? Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Saunders.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just confirm, as a newly adopted member for the Armed Forces Committee, I accepted an invitation to attend the Northwest Reserve Forces and Cadet Forces Association annual general meeting last month, and I have been accepted as a member of that association on behalf of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. It's been put to the council. Can we all agree on the report? Yeah? Wonderful. The appointment of independent persons who make a great contribution to this council. And again, City Solicitor. It's not Councillor Dennett or Mr. Dennett or Chair. It's over.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair, through you, this report recommends the appointment of 2 independent persons to the Standards Committee. Members were involved in the recruitment of the members, and interviews were conducted in June following the resignation of one of the existing independent persons. So I would just move the recommendation.
All in agreement? Now there's somebody special coming up. It's to talk about the services of realignment to public health and leadership. I would invite Councillor Ferguson if he would speak on this, please.
You've had the report circulated already. It's a 12-page report, and I intend to try and be as brief as the previous reports that you've had before. Basically, if you read the report, you'll see how the structure of the Council of Senior Leadership has changed and the savings that we've made in recent years since the appointment of the Chief Executive. And what we're talking about in here is going forward following the departure of the Director of Public Health and one other officer. So we're dealing with in here of the replacement of the Director of Public Health and also the appointment of a Director of Service Reform. You'll note from the report, it details the savings that have been made over the previous years and the savings that will be made from these proposals. They've been to the workforce panel and agreed by the workforce panel, so they're here today for you to note and question if there aren't any questions. So I would recommend the report for your noting.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Any questions, any comments? And so, Councillor Ferguson, just as you had asked us to note that the changes are there. Yes, it's a note, you're right. Yes, so, Council, will you note that that is the case? Okay. Item number 14, review of ACMA constitution.
Yes, Chair. Council is requested to note that the ACMA Executive Board and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority have agreed the amendments to the Council, to the ACMA Constitution, and to agree the revised Constitution. In addition, Council is asked to appoint the GMCA substitute member as the substitute member for the ACMA Executive Board. This is a piece of work that was carried out by the solicitor to the Combined Authority and to ACMA. The Constitution, you will notice, considerably shorter than ours and is appended here. I'm happy to take any questions, but any detailed things about the Constitution I may need to phone a friend.
Thank you very much. Can we then take note of the agreement? Item number 15, notice of motion. There has been a motion put forward for us to listen to that relates to climate change. I believe it's going to be introduced and proposed by you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for Council for giving me this opportunity to present you with this motion. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine, an otherwise hugely respected and outstanding teacher, shocked me by laughing at some students who had attended a climate strike, only to later find, to their disappointment, that it precluded them from attending the prom. Whether such a bold choice deserves a punishment was not the issue. The issue was whether young people who have the sense to realise there is a real climate emergency and have the courage to act on their convictions should be laughed at or lauded. I believe they have shown such a level of responsibility and determination they should be praised, their words heeded, and their futures valued in such a way that many politicians have yet to even begin to understand. Climate emergency is perhaps too feeble. Climate crisis is nearer the mark. We need to avoid a climate catastrophe. We have known about climate change for many decades. The political response has been largely impotent. What else should we have expected of a global political class that believes capitalism is always right? Capitalism that devastates our forests for rearing cattle and palm plants, stealing land from indigenous people, turning the lungs of the globe to unsustainable wasteland after a few years when the land is devoid of nutrients and the profits are extorted. Capitalism which drains rivers and lakes because those who take the profit can move on somewhere else when those lakes and rivers run dry. Capitalism which makes it worthwhile for the rich of one country to extort land from another, knowing the cost is their hunger, poverty and their loss of livelihood, and it will not be borne by the perpetrator, but by humans of little value in a capitalist system. They are an inconvenience. Capitalism treats the air we breathe, which protects us and gives us life, as an inexhaustible source. Our atmosphere is a place to dump unwanted emissions, the CO2, the methane, at no cost to keep profits even higher. Capitalism's answer has been to create green capitalism. We are expected to applaud McDonald's for using recycled materials in its packaging. Chevron attempts to seduce us to consuming more oil because they list environmental principles on their corporate website. Audi tries to make us feel good about buying the cars because they fund an environmental scholarship. The worst idea from green capitalism must be the carbon credits, which are supposed to make emissions more costly but have been a complete disaster. As for eliminating plastic straws, nice, but don't be fooled, it's any more than throwing a cup of water on a forest fire. On every measure, green capitalism has failed. And the response from the rich is to bleed yet more profits from the place that gives us life. Persuade people that climate science is exaggerated, experts can't be trusted, suggest climate scientists have a hidden agenda, pays off politicians to make policy which suits them but harms everyone else. The environment is a class issue. When the Koch brothers hand over $127 million to 92 groups who have attacked climate change science and policy solutions, they are not doing it for altruistic reasons. They are paying to silence protest while the rich get richer and the sphere we call home chokes. Because of the voices of young people around the world, we are finally waking up to a climate emergency. It's been a climate emergency for a long time. It was a climate emergency when Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring was published in 1962. It was an emergency 40 years ago when I was their age, when I was the age of some of today's young climate activists reading about our melting ice caps. It was an emergency in 1998 when the hockey stick graph was published in Nature magazine, demonstrating in a way that should have been undeniable that there is a link between CO2 levels in the atmosphere and global warming. 21 years later, the permafrost is melting, releasing methane at even faster rates, speeding us towards the precipice of irreversible climate change. Yet still those charged with making policy which protects our habitats, our biosphere shared with millions of species, our way of life, our jobs, our communities, our health and our lives, fiddle while our global home burns. Our trade unions have understood the urgency. They know that jobs can only be protected if transition to a green economy is to be successful. Work will need to change with it. Unions have long wanted to be part of that change. In 1976, the Lucas Plan, drawn up by trade unionists, demonstrated that a transition could be just, using worker skills not to produce military hardware.
Councillor Lewis, you've got 30 seconds left. Could you start to wind up, please?
Thank you. They failed to gain support, but they were not wrong. It is a shame their farsightedness has not been recognised. The transition must start now. Our trade unions are at the forefront of planning for a just transition, and our politicians can learn from them. I'm proud that my party, my MP, Rebecca Lunn-Bailey in particular, are doing so much to promote a Green New Deal. If a climate catastrophe is to be avoided, action, including economic, industrial, regulatory policy, need to be taken fast. It should frighten us all that our likely next Prime Minister was not long ago recorded as saying, whatever is happening to the weather at the moment, it is nothing to do with the conventional doctrine of climate change. He also said, it is fantastic news that the world has agreed to cut pollution, but I am sure those global leaders were driven by a primitive fear that the present ambient warm weather is somehow caused by humanity. And that fear is without foundation. Rather than leave you with those quotes from an irresponsible and populist politician, I will finish by quoting the 15-year-old inspiration for the rising up of our young people. It is they we should listen to. The future is theirs. Greta Thunberg said, we are about to sacrifice our civilization for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue to make enormous amounts of money. We are about to sacrifice the biosphere so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. Wise words. Please don't just support this motion. For the sake of our children and our children's future, I would ask that you demand change in any way you can possibly think of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I believe Councillor August, you're going to second this motion.
Thank you, Chair. Climate change constitutes the greatest threat faced by our country and indeed our planet today. If substantial alterations to our behaviour as a species are not made, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change state that within a mere 12 years, it is almost certain that we will have missed the chance to do so forever. We may even render this planet uninhabitable. It may sound histrionic, but it is an accepted scientific fact. We need to start thinking differently about how we can protect our planet for the next generation. That generation is already taking to the streets to demand we focus our attention on this crisis. We owe it to them to do as they ask. Young people throughout the country have been seeking to engage with the government to drive the swift, vital change they know to be necessary. There have been strikes, petitions, and organised campaigns which culminated in the extraordinary impact achieved by Extinction Rebellion, whose non-violent direct action brought London to a standstill. Seeking to do something more than simply raise awareness. Instead, thousands are now dedicated to forcing this government to pay this crisis the attention it deserves. And as a result, the government recently accepted Labour's motion for a climate emergency. Climate change is a disaster for many across the world already. If we continue on our current path, the world faces wholly unprecedented consequences. That is why I wish to wholeheartedly second this motion. The more councils adopting this motion, the more pressure we can put on our own government and other governments internationally to provide us with the tools and resources to fight climate change. It is no longer sufficient to either blame other countries for failing to recognise the threat and adapt accordingly, or to believe that the actions of another nation can compensate for our failure to fully commit to changing our behaviours. In America, the Democrats have produced their Green New Deal. In Bangladesh, the foreign minister recently warned of the existential threat climate change is to their population of 160 million people. Why have these nations begun to take such measures? Because they know that only by working together can we begin to reverse the seismic impact of human beings on the environment. In 2015, a study found that children living in inner city areas can have their lung capacity reduced by up to 10% due to air pollution. And whilst we know it's far worse for those in the polluted cities of Beijing and Sao Paulo, here in Salford too, we have areas of high congestion and poor air quality. Children shouldn't have to pay with their health for our failure to clean up our toxic air. It is disproportionately working class communities that suffer the worst effects of air pollution. It is working class communities that were the most affected during the Boxing Day floods, and it will continue to be underserved, underrepresented and underfinanced working class communities that bear the brunt of any impending environmental catastrophes. The young have made their voices clear, unequivocally. Even today in schools, as Councillor Lewis said, up and down the country, students are asking teachers for more information about climate change, about what we as a planet might face, about what they as young people might have to confront in the future. We must not let them down. We must provide them with something better. It is time for action.
Thank you, Councillor August. I'm sorry for not remembering your name. I do apologise. No, we haven't met. Councillor Turner, I believe that you've got a question.
Thank you, Chair. No, I haven't got a question. I mean, this subject is massive and we could spend weeks on it, let alone the short time we have. But I was pleased to see the motion that's in front of us. The proposer and secretary brought forward this very important subject, supporting the positive announcements that the government have made on this very subject. Indeed, only on the 8th of this month, the GMCA released a bulletin. They were pleased to announce, actually, that the government are backing the GMCA's plan to be carbon neutral by 2038. I mean, this is a very challenging thing to be doing. It's not going to be easy, but it must be done for the sake of everyone. So with that, I'm not going to go into, I'm not an expert on climate change, unlike the proposers and seconders, and I don't want to go into all the ins and outs of it, because we would be here all day, but we are going to support the motion in front of us, but not the speech by the proposer, which to me didn't have a lot of content as to the motion. Very interesting as it was, this opinion. So we will support the motion in front of us in its entirety. I'm pleased to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nielsen, I believe you have a question or a contribution to the debate.
I do, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make clear that I support the principles behind this motion. However, I really do feel that net zero by 2038 is simply and plainly not ambitious enough. In Salford, we continuously pride ourselves on heading the pack in terms of progress in Greater Manchester. On this simply, we are not. We're very committing to be carbon neutral by 2030 and Oldham pledging to be net zero by 2025. What we have, as Councillor Lewis has said, is a worsening climate crisis. The summer of 2018 was the hottest summer ever recorded in England. Here in Salford and Greater Manchester, the effects were profound. The taxpayer footed the bill for the blaze on Saddleworth Moor last summer, with a bill running into the millions. Again last year, with increasingly erratic weather patterns, the taxpayer also stumped the bill in Greater Manchester for severe flooding elsewhere. Crop yields in my ward on Chatmoss were significantly down, as was repeated across the country. And last month, June of this year, was the hottest month ever recorded on planet Earth. These events will only become more frequent and more severe in our current direction of travel. I'd implore the Council to accept that 2038 is simply not emergency enough. When we have 12 years to slam the brakes before catastrophe, we need to power forward with bringing down fossil fuel consumption to bring our target down here in Salford. And we absolutely need to get on with a wider challenge of restoring more peat bog on Chatmoss and expanding tree cover in this city and protecting both for the future. I support the principles of this motion, as I've said. However, I ask that the first principle of the action group described in this motion is to bring our target down far below 2038.
Thank you. Councillor Antrobus.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this motion and the contributions, all the contributions that have been made today. And I think it's very important that we as a council should be speaking out on this issue, because although there have been some good signals coming out of government recently, and the Prime Minister's recent announcement on the ambition for zero carbon, the fact is that the government and all government institutions at local and national level are not doing enough. Only earlier this month, on July the 10th, the Committee on Climate Change issued 2 reports. In the first one, it revealed that the government of 7 out of 24 indicators on trying to reduce carbon emissions, only 7 out of 24 were on track. In the previous time period, only 6 of 21 indicators were on track, and the government's own projections demonstrate that its policies and plans are insufficient to meet the 4th and 5th carbon budgets covering the period from 2023 to 2032. So it is very clear from that independent review that the government and society in general are not doing enough, and so we need to make sure that we address that. That was on climate change mitigation, trying to reduce carbon, but also whatever we do, even if we were in Councillor Nelson's terms, to slam the brakes on today, the fact is there is enough carbon in the atmosphere to ensure that changes take place within our climate over the coming decades. And so even if we were to end carbon emissions, we would still need to adapt our cities and other places to a changing climate. And the National Adaptation Subcommittee has said of 56 risks and opportunities identified, 21 of them are not even included in the National Adaptation Programme, which is the government's response to these issues. and those include 13 which are described as urgent actions. So it is absolutely right that today we should be calling on the government to review its situation and to make its things more urgent. And I accept that it is a challenge. One of the most moving things that I heard was at the Green Summit earlier this year, and Councillor Alex Ganotis, who had been in charge of Greater Manchester's response to climate change, talked at Green Summit of the new ambitions that the city region had. And he said, even if we do everything that we know we can do, even if we assume that there are new technologies, new developments that enable us to do even more, we will still not reach those targets. So this is not something where we can set an ambition today, and because we've set an ambition, that means it will be met. The real thing is in the doing. And I think that there is actually a good story to tell about the doing. So we shouldn't become too dismayed about this. There is a message of hope in all of this, that we can do things. You know, if you look at this city council and what we have done to address the reductions in carbon, 40% reduction by the city council in its own estate, including the first council to introduce LED in our street lighting. I think we were the first council in Greater Manchester to have 100% renewable energy procurement in electricity. So all our electricity is from renewable sources. Councillor Nelson has referred to our stewardship of the Mosslands. You know, that is Greater Manchester's most important resource. Someone might want to give me an extra few minutes, if I can, because it's really important that we understand the things that we've done. Okay. But our Green City programme of street planting, the renewables that we are doing with the Greater Manchester community renewables, our loop lines, the work we are doing to reshape our city through the Mayor's Challenge Fund on cycling, and the success of V-buses show that we can make the sort of changes that...
Councillor Antrobus, if you could wind up. Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, thank you for your indulgence, but you know, what we have done on adaptation through flood defences, the second flood basin is emblematic of the changes that we can make. Our Green City programme, the trees that are being planted in our streets, also serving to take off surface floodwater, which the Committee on Climate Change say is the biggest threat to our urban areas. There are challenges still. We need to make sure that property level protection is introduced in those properties that are at risk. And we also need to address the issue of water shortages. I'm very disappointed that this is not seen to be a national priority or even a regional priority. I think after the experience of last summer, that brought it home to us how easy it is for the region to be bereft of water. So we just need to make sure that we address that issue. And the heat island effect, too many parts of our city do not have the tree cover, do not have the urban green spaces to be able to people to be resilient to those changes. And we also need the support of the public on this. And I think one of the great things that our mayor has led on has been the Carbon Literacy Project, giving tremendous support to that. We are the capital of carbon literacy education, and I look forward to the time when every member of this council can hold up their certificates, as myself and the mayor can, for being carbon literate. And we do all these things because there is a reason. There is a reason why it's our poorest communities that were flooded in the floods of 2015. There is a reason why, if you look at tree cover in this city, it also maps almost identically onto the map of deprivation in the city. It is the areas that are most deprived that have the least tree cover. And there is a reason why the poorest are the most likely to die in any heat wave, the poorest and most vulnerable. And that is because this is, as Councillor Lewis pointed out, an issue about inequality. It's about inequality to a range of resources, and that leads to inequality to those basic environmental resources. And I think that the mission of this council, inspired by the City Mayor, means that we must make sure that we address these issues, and I do think that the resolution before us will give us a structure to be able to do that more effectively, and I commend the resolution to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but we work on a time, as you know, and I valued your contribution to the debate. We have 3 speakers left to hear. Councillor Karen Garrido, you are next.
Thank you. As Councillor Turner has stated, we fully support the motion today. We can no longer bury our head in the sand or wait for someone else to do it. We need to be doing it now, starting now. We all have to do our bit, and I would like to tell you about one of my concerns that is happening now, and we have to stop it. When I was at school, I went to Chester Zoo, and I will never forget seeing the amazing looking animal looking so exotic with his long tan hair and his very large long arms. And it was an orangutan. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would see them in the wild. But 2 years ago, I was in Borneo rainforest, walking around the forest, listening to hornbills and gibbons echoing through the forest. If you are lucky, you may catch the glimpse of an orangutan. You need to be very lucky. Or a pygmy elephant. Then in the distance, you could hear chainsaws, the smell of acid smoke, and you realise destruction is coming closer. We have to stop the chainsaws going deeper into the forest and planting palm oil plants, which in the report of 2018 by the WWF stated that palm oil plantations are fueling climate change and destroying the habitat of orangutans. The demand for palm oil has led by a large deforestation across Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand, and they are now moving into Africa. Between 2010 and 2015, Indonesia alone lost 3 million hectares of forest to palm oil cultivation. Each hectare of that forest used to release a large amount of carbon dioxide, which is equivalent to 530 people flying from Geneva to New York. It's horrendous. Palm oil represents 35% of all vegetable oil used, but has the most devastation on the endangered wildlife. It is present in 71% of our food, 24% in consumer goods, and 5% in energy, including biofuel. And this was sourced from the World Wildlife Fund Green Palm Forest Rescue. While you may be aware of the palm oil in chocolate, margarine, ice cream, bread, biscuits and cereals, we also use it in lipstick. That's just to hold the colour. Shampoo, because it helps to maintain the natural oils. Washing detergents, soap and toothpaste, resulting in half the orangutans being wiped out in the last 10 years. Is it worth it? I say no, it's not. I feel so strongly about how we've destroyed the rainforest, losing the trees which suck up our carbon, our CO2, as well as protecting our orangutans. Sumatran tigers are on the decline. pygmy elephants, and many, many more. This is why I'm asking that we become a sustainable palm oil city, that only traceable oils should be used. Last March, Chester became the world's first sustainable palm oil city, following a campaign led by the zoo. I understand that 50 local organisations, including restaurants and the City University, have joined in. I look forward to Salford being the next city. I know Oxford is looking at it, but can we look at it too? To achieve this, we will need to set up a group in council that will work with not only our partners, but with residents, supermarkets, shops, restaurants, cafes, hotels, fast food outlets, workplaces with catering services, our schools, colleges and universities, hospitals, visitors' attractions and leisure facilities, and the council, in other words, everybody in this city. I hope, Ms City Mayor, that you will take this on board and save our own forests, not only for the endangered wildlife species, but for future generations.
I don't use much shampoo. Robin. Thank you, Councillor Mrs Garrido. Councillor Mr Garrido, you're next.
Okay, well, first of all, Chair, I fully support the motion. What I don't support, I don't really want to be negative after such a brilliant speech from our wife. But I have to say that the only thing I can't support, and I feel quite bad about it, because I think Councillor Lewis is quite high in my regard. I sit on the scrutiny committee with her. But to be honest, I think she rather spoilt the motion by the attack she made, particularly on capitalism. Now, capitalism, I'm sorry, I've got to say this, without capitalism, this country would be nothing. We would have no employment. We would have people living in squalor. We would have lack of proper incomes, etc. We've seen it happen all over the world. You know, where there is communism or that type of organisation, then people suffer. And certainly that really upset me about the motion, not the motion itself, but about the proposer. Everybody else that's spoken, I support wholeheartedly. I think there's been some really good contributions. And I really just would like to point out that whether it be a Conservative government, a Labour government or whatever, right, we have seen some really good moves towards trying to address the problem. In 2080, we had a target of 80% to cut emissions. That's now in fact been in June this year 0%. And I think certainly we're going in the right direction. I agree with Councillor Antipas when he used the figures of 7%. It isn't enough, right? But you have to start somewhere, right? I do think we're on the right road, but certainly resolutions like the one today, Council, will actually help to push those who can make a difference to make a difference. And I think that's what the motion should be about. It should be about encouraging the government and industry to actually make those changes that need to be made. We're seeing other councils following the same. We've heard about Chester, Hereford, which happens to be Conservative controlled. You know, it's across all political divides, and we just must support whatever measures we possibly can to actually reduce the damage that's being done.
Thank you. City Mayor.
Okay, I fully support the climate emergency declaration of this City Council. I just want to draw members' attention really to the differences in timescales we're operating to. So colleagues will be aware that the Climate Change Act of 2008 committed the government to an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. That's net zero greenhouse gases by 2050 that the national government are committed to. The timescale we're referring to in this motion today is very different to the timescale that our current government is operating to. And just to bring that into reality in terms of what that means, if we follow the government's definition, there's only a 50-50 chance of us staying below the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise by 2100. And that's if all other countries actually follow the UK's lead, a 50-50 chance. So you're absolutely right, Councillor, that we're not being necessarily ambitious enough if we're operating to the government's definition of 2050. But you'll be aware that in Greater Manchester, we've committed to carbon neutrality by 2038. And actually, we've done more than that, because in the housing strategy, we've also committed to net zero carbon homes from 2028, 10 years earlier. So any new homes that are being built will be net zero carbon from 2028. So I would argue in many respects we are being fairly ambitious within our motion, but also in the work that we're doing within Greater Manchester. And I would just like to draw colleagues' attention to the last point really in this motion today, and that is obviously that I'm being asked to write to the Prime Minister, but that I'm also being asked to write to ask for resources and powers. And that comes down to the point that Councillor Antrobus was raising earlier. Salford City Council, I think, have been leading the way in terms of tackling climate change through sustainable drainage initiatives, through our second flood basin, as we've already heard about, which has become a nature reserve in an urban part of the city. We've been leading the way in terms of walking and cycling, in terms of downloading monies through Greater Manchester to engage more people in active forms of transport within our city region. We've been leading the way in terms of solar. We've been leading the way in terms of LED lighting. Many of our schools now have solar panels on them, thanks to the work of Greater Manchester Community Renewables, where people are actually buying shares to install photovoltaics on the roofs of our schools in this city. We've been leading the way in terms of electric charging points and electric vehicles, and our Green Wheel scheme here in the City Council, which was the first within Greater Manchester, again to try and reduce carbon. We've been leading the way with regards to new forms of heating systems, ground source heat pumps, district heating systems, heat networks, looking at opportunities to build on our successes to date. And we've also been leading the way in terms of carbon literacy. We have a citywide consortium teaching people of the importance of reducing our carbon footprint here in the city of Salford. And I'm told this is actually one of the first in the world. So I think we actually have an awful lot in this city council to be really proud of. Do I think it's enough? No, I don't. But actually this brings me back to my original point about resources and powers, because I genuinely only believe that if national government takes this agenda seriously, one from a legislative point of view, but also from a resources point of view, we can achieve so much more. And if they work with progressive councils like Salford City Council, just think of what we can achieve together to actually tackle this climate change emergency. I don't need to remind colleagues in this chamber of the crisis we face in local government. We've lost £211 million since 2010. 53% of our revenue support grant has gone. And we're currently working on a budget for next year where another potentially £15 million will have to be taken out of our budget. Now, you're not telling me, anyone in this room, that enables us to do more on this agenda. It actually stifles our ability to make progress. So when I do write to the Prime Minister on this issue, I'll be making it absolutely clear that yes, give us the powers, but more importantly, give us the resources to really deliver on this agenda and ensure we do have a genuine green revolution in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, City Mayor. Councillor Lightner.
Thank you, Chair. As King David wrote in Psalms that our earth, the planet, is one of the greatest gifts given to mankind, and it's our duty to preserve it, and like my fellow Conservative colleagues, I will be supporting this motion. However, we need to see that we give over to the future generations a sustainable planet, not just a healthy one. What we need is pragmatic plans and policies that will both bring down the emissions and build a green economy, not just in the type of thing that we're seeing from the current government, not like what Labour are proposing on the other hand is at any price bring down the emissions and to bring down the economy with it. What we should be doing is positive plans. For example, we need to be promoting public transport. We need to be pushing people to use public transport, trains, as opposed to owning and driving private vehicles, not supporting ludicrous protests which shut down train lines which take thousands of people to work on trains, not in private vehicles. In a similar vein, we're seeing here in Greater Manchester, the Mayor Andy Burnham wants to introduce a fine on buses, a fine on taxis, which will inevitably push up the price of public transport, probably push people to buy their own cars. This motion is aimed at making the world better, not worse.
Thank you, Councillor Leighton. I'd like to hand back over to Councillor Lewis to sum up this motion.
Thank you very much for all those who supported the motion. I'd just like to respond to a few things that people have said in your responses. Councillor Turner, you said two things. One was that you didn't understand the issues, but you didn't support what I said. Well, can I just point out that that's doing that thing that people shouldn't do, which is ignoring the experts. When I studied for a BSc in environmental studies, which I completed about 5 years ago, I can assure you there are many environmentalists who believe that capitalism is the fundamental problem and why we cannot get to a situation where we can make this globe safe. And I can suggest a reading list to you. One of the ones I would start with is one called The Land Grabbers, The New Fight Over Who Owns the Earth by Fred Pearce. So if you want to make a note of that, you might find that useful. Councillor Nelson, I agree with you completely. We have had discussions about this. I don't believe 2038 is challenging enough if we are to avoid the devastation that is likely to happen. And it's about what is feasible as opposed to what we need to do to avoid the disaster. We need to be trying to push for those stronger targets, and that, you know, I hope that debate will be going on from today and continue. Councillor Andrews, I'm very proud of you because you're always passionate, and we often have these discussions about the environment. And one of the things that has always struck me is your clear passion for the environment, and which has been there, as I know, for many years. We talked about when you were young in Little Hulton and the issues over Cutacre. So I know this is absolutely fundamentally at the heart of what you believe. It's very worrying that some of those targets are already being missed. And we just must not lose it. As much as we have done in Salford and at Greater Manchester level, we need to be reminded constantly that that challenge is serious, it is extensive, and it requires courageous action. Councillor Garrido, Karen Garrido, absolutely what you said about palm oil. I've been getting my children to read labels on packaging for the last 10 years. What is concerning is that still so many people don't understand how bad palm oil is. I would suggest everybody in here do that same thing. Go and read your labels. It's very, very hard to avoid palm oil, but there are ways of reducing our palm oil consumption. In fact, I think Iceland actually said they were going to get rid of palm oil in all of their products. And as much as they tried, they couldn't do it by they set themselves because it's so difficult. But that's the reason why we need national action, and it's very difficult for us to do. As much needs to be done at this level. Councillor Robin Garrido, you undervalue the state yet again. It is the state that creates the money that makes the state run, makes society run. And capitalism owes an awful lot to the state. It couldn't do it without the state, and it couldn't do it without government. And as long as we have a government at the national level that understands the potential of the state, we can actually solve this problem. While we have capitalists in government who think that capitalism is the one that's going to solve all the problems. I remind you that I said in my speech, green capitalism has failed. And people no longer talk about climate credits because they know it failed. It was a way yet again to fool the public that we can trust capitalism with the environment. We can't. That's absolutely crystal clear. I am not a communist. I never have been a communist. And many people blame capitalism, not just communists. Some of those who blame capitalism are very well-respected economists, and perhaps I should send you a reading list as well. I would thank the City Mayor for your clarity about the lack of ambition of this government. We are doing what we can in Salford and Greater Manchester with our limited budget, and as I've already pointed out, the national government does not have a limit, and it can do far more than we can, and that is why we constantly have to look to national government and pressure them to do something more. I have been a climate activist for 35 years, so I did consider not making this political, but that thought only lingered very momentarily in my mind. Actually, having been a climate activist for 35 years, I'm not going to be quiet about the devastation that capitalism causes. We know it does. It's absolutely crystal clear. If we don't change the system, we cannot use our imaginations to create a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I think we've given a good hearing, and there's been plenty of people involved in the debate. To safely say, we'd like to put the motion to a vote. All those in agreement, please show. All those against, please show. Any abstentions? Please show. Thank you. The motion has been carried unanimously. Thank you. Well, with the extension, we're 30 minutes over time, but I'm sure because there's people leaving, some people need a comfort break and a good brew. So can I suggest that we take a 10-minute break and return back here for 11:25. Thank you. Please have a seat. can I just say we're waiting on the city mayor to come. He's next to gender item, so when he comes in, give him a loud and deal applause. Yeah. Thank you, City Mayor. That's 5 minutes of your 20 minutes.
Apologies. Good morning, Chair and members of the Council. Firstly, can I start today's proceedings by welcoming our newest and recent elected councillor, Joshua Brooks, to the City Council. Can I congratulate him and the residents of Walkden South for supporting another Labour councillor who I know will work tirelessly in their best interests. I'm also looking forward to continuing to work with Councillor Brooks and the councillors of Walkden South in the interests of the residents of the city of Salford. Following on from the minute silence, I'd like to add my thoughts and remember the genocide that took place on the 11th of July 1995. 50 years after the world said never again to the horrors of the Holocaust. The name Srebrenica has become synonymous with those dark days in July 1995, when in the first ever UN declared safe area, thousands of men and boys were systematically murdered and buried in mass graves. The victims, predominantly Muslim, were selected for death on the basis of their race and identity. This was the worst atrocity on European soil since the Second World War. The lessons from Srebrenica is that no society is invulnerable to prejudice and intolerance. And we must all remain vigilant against these forces and take positive action to build stronger, more tolerant and resilient communities. I'd also, at this point, like to pay tribute to Councillor Heather Fletcher, who does an awful lot of work, actually, remembering Srebrenica, working with the Jewish and Muslim Forum, both within Salford, but also across Greater Manchester. As the schools start to break up for the summer, we're all very aware of the real problem of hunger for many families during the school holidays. The school holiday should be, for many, an exciting time for children and also for their families. But for many struggling to make ends meet, it pushes them further into food poverty and also into insecurity. And building on the positive impacts of last year's holiday food support as part of the city's anti-poverty strategy, working together with Booth's Charities, I'm grateful that we're able to launch the Healthy Holiday Food Vouchers to help towards the cost of food during the 6 weeks holiday. The £30 grocery vouchers will be made available to those eligible through the Salford Assist programme, implemented to help people facing a crisis or in an emergency. And this is at a time when we saw 87,496 food parcels going to children during summer holidays last year. In Salford, around 8,500 children qualify for free school meals, and we hope that this scheme will go some way to support many vulnerable families in the city. Families that do not qualify for a free school meal voucher scheme, but are also in need of some short-term support, can still apply through the Salford Assist programme. And I'd urge every member of the council to share this information with your communities, letting residents know that help is available in our city. As of yesterday, I understand the City Council has received 300 applications for the scheme so far. And one mum actually said, "Thank you so much. It will make such a difference to me and my children over the holidays." In many respects, it's an absolute scandal that in one of the richest economies in the world, this is actually happening. And for 300 applications not long after the scheme going live, it really demonstrates the scale of poverty and destitution within our city and within the United Kingdom more broadly. Moving on to a different topic really, the issue of housing. Many of us in this chamber will know that British housing system is currently not delivering the homes that the country needs or that people can actually afford. These are issues which, in my opinion, go right to the heart of the planning system and the government's national planning policy framework, which was introduced in 2012 by the Tory Liberal Democrat coalition at the time. Conservative policy making makes no real distinction between the different types of housing people need, but is primarily concerned with quantity. It places limited value on contributions to infrastructure from developers and restricts our ability to gain them as local authorities. It presumes in favour of what it refers to as sustainable development, wherever it is, which, as we know, is a presumption that often threatens our protected green spaces up and down the country. In many respects, you could say it's a developer's charter, interested only in maximising profits for landowners, private developers, and future landlords, not in the slightest really catering for the real needs of the British public. And to meet the government's arbitrary target of 300,000 homes a year, each local authority has been allocated its share. In Greater Manchester, that amounts to 201,000 homes by 2037. And landowner and developer profits are prioritised over contributions if a developer is able to demonstrate that a scheme is not viable or unviable. They can change and refuse to make those contributions, and what we are left with is a planning system which is unable to effectively regulate the types of homes which are built and unable to guarantee a flow of new homes which we actually need. With a system stacked so much in favour of landowners and developers, to solve the crisis, we need to think differently. And this is why, in many respects, this city council has chosen to be more interventionist within the free market. We are beginning to turn a corner in the city of Salford with affordable and social rented homes. Our numbers of affordable home starts in 2018-19 accounted for 23% of all starts in Greater Manchester, the second highest in Greater Manchester, up from 11% in 2016-17. And importantly, Salford, like 4 other Greater Manchester authorities, are now able to seek much needed social rent funding from central government. Although obviously there is a leading time and some complicated benefit cost ratios we need to jump through to actually meet the criteria that government have set us, 17% of starts on site for 2018-19 were actually for social rent, of which 1 in 9 were in the city of Salford. And in relation to completions over the past 3 years, Salford has delivered the most completions of any Greater Manchester authority, accounting for 21% of all completions. This is a a good achievement, but there's significant work still to be done. And despite policy changes and working collaboratively with affordable housing partners in the city and across the city region to exploit these new opportunities, delivering the right volume, size, type and tenure of affordable housing is still a significant challenge for Salford and many other local authorities in the country. Colleagues will know that this City Council has set up its own development company, Derive, and building on the success of the first Derive business plan, the second has committed £15.8 million to deliver 117 units, and that has actually been approved. At the last council, we were informed of the plans provided to deliver mixed tenure development in Dutchy in Irwell Riverside Ward. The scheme will deliver 72 units, 32 for sale, 22 shared ownership, 10 affordable rent, and 8 units for Derive. Dutchy was Derive's first scheme entered into contract, and following on from this, I was delighted to approve the sale of land recently subject to planning at Astley Road in Earlham and Caddishead to allow for 27 new affordable homes to be built. The site will be a mix of 6 affordable rented homes, 6 for social rent, 10 for shared ownership, and a further 5 homes for Derive. Another 3 schemes are in advanced negotiations and will deliver a further 72 units across wards in the city. On top of that, our forthcoming local plan, as many of you will know, will seek a minimum of 20% affordable homes on new residential sites in Salford, rising up to 50% where viability allows us to. And we'll be applying this approach on larger sites from later on this year through our planning obligations supplementary planning document. Housing providers are already beginning to answer the call, bringing forward independent social housing projects across the city. And I was really pleased only a couple of weeks ago to actually go to Eccles and visit the site of For Housing, where they're providing sub-social rented properties in the city of Salford, responding to some of the welfare reforms which mean that under 35s are not eligible for full housing benefit, but they are eligible to access these properties that are being built. The recent ratified Greater Manchester Combined Authority housing strategy also emphasises the importance of social rented and supported accommodation, and crucially looking to lever in funds from health colleagues to deliver much needed 15,000 units of supported accommodation over the next approximately 20 years. In Salford, we currently have 6,280 households on our housing waiting list, 191 people in statutory temporary accommodation, and 115 people in a bed every night accommodation. And that is against a national 12% drop in the number of developers starting on site to build social rented homes, and that's according to Homes England's latest statistics. There are 52 bids for every affordable home we advertise, and homeless presentations continue to rise within the city. All of this shows the necessity of being more interventionist through Derive as a chief driver of tackling the shortage of truly affordable and social rented properties in the city of Salford. It was my honour to speak with many partners across Greater Manchester recently at the launch of the Housing First initiative. And in Greater Manchester, we're just one of 3 national pilots alongside the West Midlands and the Liverpool City region. The project means an extra £8 million over 3 years for Greater Manchester, with which what we will do is aim to provide support and accommodation for up to 400 people with very complex needs across Greater Manchester. This money is a drop in the ocean compared to what local authorities and services across Greater Manchester have already lost as a consequence of austerity since 2010. But as targeted funding, it will help across Greater Manchester to make a real difference to those 400 people's lives. Rough sleeping, as many will know in this chamber, has increased by 487% in Greater Manchester since 2010. It is an absolute scandal that in the 21st century Britain, this is happening on our streets, in our communities. We've also seen a 350% rise in temporary accommodation and a huge rise in waiting lists, meaning that vulnerable people find it much harder to access housing. This is a crisis, and Housing First is amongst the few truly evidence-based approaches to tackle entrenched rough sleeping and homelessness. And it has been used to eradicate homelessness in Finland, also in North America, Canada, and also other parts of Europe. The principle in many respects is simple. Stable housing with wraparound support is the best antidote to homelessness. Supported accommodation was once used much more extensively in this country, but since austerity we've seen significant reductions in this. The loss of the social housing sector has also had detrimental impacts on what is the 21st century housing crisis. So we are incredibly pleased to have been selected by the government to pilot Housing First, and in conjunction with everything else that's happening within the city region, we do believe this will have positive implications and impacts on people's lives. The Universal Credit scam, currently hitting the headlines, you may have seen, nationally, was brought to my attention only recently by our own in-house welfare rights and debt advice service. 3 households, which could be the tip of the iceberg initially, approached us for advice and assistance following the Universal Credit scam, which left the families, all of whom have young children, in financial hardship and distress. Protocols have since been put in place across all agencies to monitor the situation, and it has become apparent that a scam is being employed to obtain a lump sum advance payment for Universal Credit by offering to help people obtain a loan, gain personal information from the victim, and claiming Universal Credit without their knowledge or consent in order that they access these payments. This is a nationwide issue which, according to the BBC, is estimated to have cost the taxpayer over £20 million so far and 42,000 cases. This is despite that back in 2013, the government announced that Universal Credit would reduce fraud and error in the benefit system. So what I've done is I've written to the Minister to express my deep concerns that Universal Credit Full Service continues to operate nationally and is failing to protect financially vulnerable people and their children from exploitation by scammers. And I'm concerned that these recent examples illustrate a number of flaws within the online credit system, in particular the digital by default design and ongoing IT problems, including the online ID verification, which means that the scammers can impersonate someone else with minimal personal information being used to make a false claim. Furthermore, the design of Universal Credit itself, with an inbuilt 5-week wait for the first payment, means people in poverty or without savings find it very difficult to pay for essentials such as food, fuel, rent, while waiting for their benefits. By way of mitigation, it appears that the DWP has introduced advance payment application facility online. The scammers are exploiting this system by falsely claiming on behalf of other people. This is of real concern to us in the city of Salford, and we are closely monitoring. What I've done in my letter to the Minister is sought assurances that these scams are being looked at urgently and appropriate safeguards are put in place to prevent this happening in the future. I was also delighted at the recent news that you may have all heard of, that Salford's Clinical Commissioning Group has actually received its annual assessment for 2018-19 and has received a rating of outstanding for 4 years in a row. No mean achievement really, and absolutely fantastic achievement for for our city. This is truly a testament, I think, to the strength of the partnership working in the city and all the staff within the clinical commissioning group and also partners across the city as well. And it's had such a positive impact upon health and social care outcomes for Salford residents and continues to do so into the future. I was also delighted to attend the annual Aspire Awards with Councillor Gina Reynolds recently. The awards are presented to people and teams and are chosen by their peers in recognition of their achievements. It was an inspiration to listen to work of staff who supported our vulnerable adults and young people in Salford. And on the night, 6 care workers received their long service awards, 165 years of dedicated service. Carol Torkington, Anne Anderson, Sue Herbert, Margaret Gormley, Leanne Freebody-Smith have all served 25 years in the field of care work and 40 years for Marie Dunn. These are the unsung heroes of the city of Salford, providing care to some of our most vulnerable people in the city. It was also fantastic to attend a number of other events in the city, such as the Chinese Dragon Boat Race, the annual Chinese Dragon Boat Race, the Pink Picnic, the Armed Forces Day Parade, and Family Fun Day at Winton Park. And more recently, I attended the Precarious Carnival Day with Councillor Tracy Kelly to celebrate the Bridgewater Canal's 258th birthday. And it was great to see many councillors littered along the canal celebrating its birthday, along with myself with a loudspeaker on a barge. And also, that same weekend, I was invited to attend Walkden South to participate in a greening event, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and Councillor Edwards kindly invited me along or told me I must attend. It's probably more apt. I just want to say that because I think there's so much happening in the city of Salford, and sometimes when you reflect on it, it's absolutely amazing all the things that are happening. I could go on and talk about our green flag parks, because I'm sure some of you have seen recently that Blackleach Country Park, Clifton Country Park, Boothsbank Park and Peel Green Cemetery have actually kept their green flag status for yet another year. And this is a fantastic achievement to the friends of those parks and for the communities and the residents who devote so many hours of their time in supporting those parks and creating what are fantastic assets for the city of Salford. Finally, I'd just like to congratulate council staff and volunteers for all of these many wonderful achievements, because without their commitment and hard work, I know much of the good stuff that happens in our city would never happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, City Mayor. Just, what a vision you've created. Councillors littered along with the canal. It's lovely. We haven't received any questions by notice, but I'd like to open up to any comments or questions to the City Mayor. Councillor Hines.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, could congratulate the Mayor again once again for his speech where he touches upon the real issues that are facing the city. To Paul, you talk about what we're doing for people during the summer holidays, young people. It's an absolute shame in a country, as you've said, who's powerful and as rich as us, that people are having to seek this help. This is after 9 years of the austerity that's taking place. I often wonder whether I'm living in the real world when you see at the moment in this contest for a new Prime Minister, where the two contestants there are talking as though things that we've all been told there isn't, that there's vast amounts of money. Vast amounts of money, of course, to really not tackle the deep-seated roots and the problems that we have, but to help the rich and powerful, because that's what it's about. You know, we talk about raising the tax thresholds for the richest in this country. We talk about corporation tax reductions that will really hurt where the money should be spent.
So really, you touched upon, Paul, the crisis in housing. You could have gone on a lot more of the crisis that I want to keep talking about all the time. The crisis on almost every issue that's facing the British people today. We've got to really get to grips with what the real issues are. We've almost become accustomed to this is how it's got to be, in the sense. Kate, when we're talking about the issues of climate change, mentioned the word capitalism. Well, good God, we all know that capitalism, however, and I'm not saying it's going to die tomorrow, but it's on its last legs. It hasn't got the answer worldwide for the issues that are coming again. And that is shown by this, the sixth richest country in the world that's suffering from it. And the United States, the strongest, where there has been growth, and there is growth. But there's now people saying that they're going to go into recession. The United States, and it's only 10 years since we went into the last one. So capitalism has got a problem. But, and I will finish on this, because I want to remind people of what Theresa May said when she took over as the Prime Minister in 2016. Burning injustice caused by poverty and racism. She berated the people in Westminster for failing to realise how hard things were. We don't just believe in markets, but in communities. And she turned Thatcherism over in one foul swoop when she said, we don't just believe in individualism, but in society. What has Theresa May and her government done to support that statement of 3 years ago? Absolutely nothing. They've been reft of any answers to the big issues that you, Mayor, Mr. Mayor, made concerning the crisis that's prevailing in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to say yes, another excellent speech by our City Mayor. Thank you very much indeed for mentioning my role with interfaith work. And also, I'm very pleased that you said in detail what happened in Srebrenica, because it explains why we had that minute silence to people who are not quite as aware of to why we did so. And just to say that I'm sure you're all aware of things Donald Trump has said this week about the 4 Congress ladies in America. And also, the next Prime Minister of this country has said many racist comments in the past. And therefore, I feel it is even more important than ever before that we remember the Holocaust, Srebrenica, other genocides, and we all stick together and fight racism whenever it occurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Robin Guido.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back very briefly on what Councillor Hines said, I think he forgot to admit that China, I've tried to explain this to Councillor Lewis, but China, in fact, which is the largest non-capitalist country, is also the one that is suffering the most at the moment in terms of growth. So I think we just need a few facts there. So just in fact to come on to the...
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say to Councillor Robin Guido that China, with all its problems, has carried the world for the last 10 years.
Thank you.
Well, I think we can have separate debates on that, Mr. Chair. I won't rise to that at the moment. But I did want to say, through you, Chair, to the City Mayor, was about the housing figures. And I do think that we need to congratulate, I'm not just referring to one company here, as I did declare interest at the beginning, but I think registered providers generally have provided a great service to this city and in Greater Manchester generally. And in fact, the City Mayor actually referred to that when he referred to the numbers of houses being provided at social rents, affordable rents, for sale, and shared ownership. And we've got a really, really good record of having achieved those things. What concerns me, in fact, is, and I've said this previously, that we've now set up this the Reeve Company, which in fact is duplicating very much the successes against the successes that we've had in the past. And I don't really see any reason why the council needs to get involved in that. One of the reasons that we were given when the Reeve was set up was that they wanted more houses with social rents. And yet we've heard from the city mayor this morning that in fact they're building exactly the same as the RPs have been doing, with a mixture of various different types of houses. And I think it's very important, Chair, that when we build houses, we're also building communities, right? And communities need to be mixed. We don't need to have segregated areas of one type of housing or another. We need to make sure that we continue in this city, as we've been doing in the last few years, with a mix of tenures, a mix of different types of houses, so that in fact there is no difference between somebody living next door to somebody paying social rent and somebody actually owning their own house. I think that's very important, and I'm really concerned that this Reeve Company, in fact, is wanting to head down a different route. I think the other thing that I just want to say, in fact, is I think if I heard him correctly, my hearing's not that brilliant these days, but I think, in fact, you referred to some companies who were being able to prove that it wasn't a particularly viable scheme and therefore not paying 106 money. And I think I have to remind the City Mayor that we've not actually really, as a council, got a very good record of spending 106 money. Over £11.8 million up to this year remained unspent by this council of 106 money. Now that's a disgrace. And we can't complain on the one hand a developer's not paying 106 money, and on the other hand, as a council, not spending what we do receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrido. Next, Councillor Kelly.
It's just to say thanks to our Mayor really for his comments with regarding to housing, and I take on board what you're saying there, Councillor Greedo, with regards to Reeve. However, I'm very passionate about Reeve and I will declare an interest. I'm also a director. But the good thing about Reeve, what other registered providers are not doing, is there is no right to buy with the Reeve product. So that is something I'm passionate about, that those houses will stay in stock and go to the people, the vulnerable people of our city that need them. I'd also like to thank all our housing staff who we have brought back in-house, and they have got a difficult job on their hands, and I just want to thank them for the work that they do. As you know, as councillors, you get lots of casework with regarding housing, and we do not have the stock. So some of what the City Mayor has mentioned today is going somewhat way with the registered providers to make that happen for some of our residents. And we know we've got difficulties with over 6,000 people on the housing list. We're never going to be able to sustain that amount of house building, but we just need to know that we are behind them and we are supporting what we can do in this city. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Murray.
Perhaps I better start by declaring an interest as well. I am the chair of the board of Reeve, and I was listening quite benignly to Councillor Robin Garrido for most of his speech until he started on the issue of Reeve. I can't understand why he thinks there's not scope for Reeve as well as the other housing providers. Are they worried about the competition that Reeve might be providing for them? Well, because when he talks about the duplication, right, that would only be duplication if we're providing an excess of housing stock and solve the council waiting list. Is it the fact that the providers want to have people on the council waiting list so they can actually pick and choose from the people there? Councillor Kelly has exactly described the situation. The stock provided by Reeve, and it's made clear to tenants before they come into it, is not subject to the right to buy legislation, and we can actually provide a whole mix of provision in terms of social and affordable rents. And yes, we will be building units for sale, but only in the sense that we want to provide money for a because I agree with him, a mixed community is more important. But B, that money will go to provide yet more housing stock. So, as I say, this is the issue that we're trying to address. I do wholeheartedly endorse Councillor Hines' comments as well. We are moving into a very serious situation in the world, and part of that has got to be about the provision of affordable housing by a variety of people, including Derive and including the council being prepared to intervene to actually provide that stock for ordinary people of Salford. And I'm sorry Councillor Garrido feels the need to try and ration it.
Councillor Andrews.
I just wanted to correct the misleading statement that Councillor Garrido made regarding Section 106 funding, where he described the unspent monies as a disgrace. The unspent monies are there as a direct result of the government regulations which require local authorities, because we'd only have 5 lots of Section 106 to contribute to a scheme. So when the money comes in, until we've got the 5 contributions in, we can't actually spend the money because of government regulation. And if you look at Section 106 funding, there's only Manchester, which is a far bigger authority than Salford, that comes anywhere near the amount of Section 106 secured through the endeavours of our planning officers and the planning panel. So rather than calling it a disgrace, we should celebrate the great success of Salford, not only in securing Section 106, but making sure that it starts to fund some of that infrastructure which we desperately need in terms of some of the developments that are going on. Other authorities in Greater Manchester are jealous of what we achieve. And one of the saddest things was when Trafford was Tory controlled, they actually decided not to secure Section 106 agreements and go for the community infrastructure levy, which basically means that they didn't get anything from developers coming forward to support them. Another Tory misjudgment. Celebrate what Labour does in Salford and look with regret on what the Tories did in Trafford.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Gina Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, Paul, thank you very much for sharing with everyone the news about the outstanding CQC rating for the CCG. I really welcome that news. It's absolutely fantastic, and as you say, it is a testament to not only the strong leadership and all the dedication and hard work of all the staff of the CCG, but to also partnership working with the City Council. I look forward to continuing that partnership working under our new governance structure in our integrated health and social care system. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the amazing staff, care staff at Aspire, who do some really hard work addressing the needs, the health and social care needs of some of our population. And I'd just like to echo your comments. Thank you.
Councillor, thank you very much for your comments. Councillor Reynolds, can I pass back to the City Mayor for a response?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Responding to Councillor Hines in the first instance, really, food hunger is a national disgrace. As I said in my speech, last year, 87,496 young children relied on a food parcel over the summer holidays. And as you know, in the City of Salford, 8,500 children are entitled to free school meals, just to give you an indication of what we're talking about in this city alone. I think you're absolutely right in terms of the Conservative Party being bereft of ideas about how to tackle some of the big issues, and how in many respects what the party are doing nationally is tinkering around the edges. And if you like, the competition for the next Prime Minister has been indicative of that in many respects, really. And how, what I find really interesting, observing as a bit of an outsider through the press and the media, is how their rationality of what's really going on in life is so bounded and so removed from day-to-day life, certainly as I see it here in the city of Salford. And transforming that means we have to transform politics, because it's quite clear to me that many of our politicians are so far removed from the day-to-day experiences of people's lives, and what we need is better representation, I would argue, in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, in council chambers up and down the country, to better reflect what's really happening within our communities and our neighbourhoods across the country. I think you're absolutely right on capitalism. I think capitalism is fundamentally failing us. The neoliberal project has come to its end, and at the moment our government has no alternative. I think it's only my party, I believe, that actually have an alternative, and my ask is to make way for a new government with ideas that I think will transform this country. Councillor Fletcher, thank you very much for your kind comments on Srebrenica. I think you're absolutely right to highlight that we must always continue to remember and remind ourselves of the atrocities and the genocides that have taken place across the world over many, many years. And I think we have cross-party agreement on the issue of tackling racism together, and sticking together in the face of racism and fascism is really, really important. And I know it's something that this council chamber takes really seriously. Councillor Garrido, on the issue of housing, I have to say I'm somewhat concerned at some of your comments. And to set this in context, I guess, as a way of an answer, at the moment across Greater Manchester, more than 97,000 people are actually sitting on our housing waiting lists. Those are households requiring a home. And since 1980, more than 92,000 homes have been purchased in Greater Manchester under right to buy. What's quite interesting about those two figures is they're not that dissimilar, are they? There's 5,000 in it. 97,000 on our housing waiting list, 92,000 homes purchased since 1980 under right to buy. And what we know nationally is approximately 40% of homes purchased under right to buy find their way into the private rented sector, where we know we have huge challenges within Greater Manchester in terms of quality of accommodation, affordability. We also know it's the private rented sector in terms of no-fault evictions that is the primary cause of homelessness, not only within Greater Manchester, but across the country. So I think when you consider all of that and the fact that within Salford we have 6,280 people currently on our housing waiting list, I think it's absolutely right and proper that this city council looks at its land assets and looks at how it can actually create value from its land assets by building truly affordable accommodation that genuinely meets the needs of the people of this city. And I stress genuinely meets the needs because at the moment, as I said in my speech, we actually have a housing policy and a planning policy that is so geared towards supporting the free market, be that profits for landowners, because we actually have no mechanism for capturing land value within the National Planning Policy Framework. That policy framework, which is your government's policy framework, protects the hope value of land. That means land as though it's got planning permission on it. We also have a national planning policy framework that protects developer profits, at least 20%, and that's probably a conservative estimate. So to talk to me as the mayor of this council, trying to do the best with our resources, our land, and to genuinely try and meet need and say this is somehow misled or the wrong thing to be doing, I find, well, words fail me, let's be honest. It's not logical, it's not rational, it's not commonsensical, and it's certainly not in the best interests of the people of this city. In terms of mixed housing, you made a point there, and I started to think for one moment, did you actually listen to what I said in my speech? Because the schemes that have been brought forward today, with Dereeve's involvement, are exactly that. They're mixed housing developments. So we are supportive of mixed housing development. So you don't need to worry about that moving forward. It is something that in our housing policy we want to see more of. But I have to be honest, my first priority is making sure we get our housing waiting list down, that we don't have an issue with rough sleeping and homelessness in the city, and that we put roofs over people's heads. This is a basic human right as far as I'm concerned. And that is the approach we are taking in this city in terms of our housing policy. I'm not going to probably comment on Councillor Merry and Councillor Kelly's point, because in many respects they were responding to the questions that Councillor Garrido raised. Councillor Antrobus, thank you very much for confirming Section 106. I mean, again, from my point of view, I see it as quite logical. A good example of this would be a development takes place, there's a contribution through 106 towards a school, maybe. That school doesn't get built because of one contribution from one development, but it gets built because of lots of contributions from lots of developments across the city. So inevitably, from a cash flow point of view, you have to bank the money until that demand arises for a school to then spend that money and build that school, potentially. This is how these things work. And if you extrapolate that across more broadly, infrastructure, then you can understand quite logically why we have to bank Section 106 for infrastructure requirements and strategically planning for that. And finally, in terms of Councillor Reynolds' point, the CQC outstanding, absolutely agree with you. I think Salford's clinical commissioning group is leading the way in many respects, both within Salford but also across Greater Manchester and nationally, and it's great to see us recognised for that. And the last point on Aspire, I think absolutely, you know, that was an amazing event that we both went to, but for me to see what I think are the unsung heroes of this city, the people who provide care day in, day out to some of the most vulnerable people within our city was, you know, a real pleasure for me, and to just, you know, present them with awards, meet them in person and talk with them was a great delight. So thank you for sharing that moment with me.
Thank you, City Mayor. Again, this next item, which is item number, is it 18? 18. We haven't had any questions written into us with notice, and so it's open to this floor. If anybody has any questions to the different members of the Cabinet in response to their work carried out. The first one, Paula Bushell, any questions? Any comments? Councillor Merry, any questions? Councillor Collins.
Thank you very much. Councillor Merry, this is with regards to what was formerly known as Walkden High School, now Salford Co-op Academy, Walkden. Parents were told at the beginning of the school year last September that pupils needed to purchase a Chromebook, which is a form of a laptop, in order to access their learning. Some parents had to sign up to finance deals in order to spread the cost. These items cost about £300. At this time, the school was still under the local authority's control. But in December last year, the school joined the Co-op Academy Trust, and it soon became obvious that the Chromebooks were not being used. The Trust has now confirmed that, and to quote, "The laptops will still be incredibly useful to students working from home, but they are not needed in school. The school is now offering to buy them back from parents for £100. The interim executive principal, in a letter to parents, said that under the local authority, the previous leadership made the decision to ask each parent to purchase a Chromebook. He wanted to make it clear that this is fundamentally opposed to their cooperative values and that no parent should have to pay for their child to access education." A spokesperson for Salford City Council said that decisions about school equipment are made by individual schools. Salford City Council was not involved in the decision to ask parents to buy specific laptops. My question to Councillor Merry is this: when the school was still under the local authority, governing body meetings would have been minuted by a clerk, and as this issue must have been discussed by governors, why was it not picked up by the local authority, who I would have assumed would have advised against the request that parents purchase Chromebooks? Thank you.
Councillor Merrick. Would you like to take them? Okay. Garrido.
Thank you, Chair. During the recent Walton South by-election, a statement was issued by the two ward councillors, Councillor Critchley and Edwards, and also by the new ward councillor, Councillor Brooks, that the government had agreed that the St George's school site be used for a new preschool. Now that was incorrect and misleading information. Would you join with me in condemning the use of misleading information, whether during the election or at any other time?
Councillor Critchley.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a similar question actually about that site to get a bit more clarity exactly what is being proposed there. Because it was actually during the election period that the government or the Manchester Evening News broke that the government was proposing a new 750-place free school on the site of St George's school site in Wardham. There was no consultation with residents, none with ward councillors, and neighbouring schools weren't informed either about this. This is no way to make an important announcement about education in this city. Whilst we do welcome investment in education, the St George's site had been mooted for a long time as a possible new primary school, something that the residents wanted and need in the area. A free school, by its nature, has the potential to compete with neighbouring schools for staff and pupils, which raises serious concerns about pupil planning in the area and does give us a lot of concern. I understand that the council would have to hand over this site for peppercorn rent and could also be hit with costs for clearing that site as well. As I doing this without any consultation is a serious worry. I'd just like the lead member to explain exactly what's happening and what's the council position on this, please.
I've just heard a first today, which is Robin Garrido, as I understand it, condemning his own government for making the announcement during the Walton by-election.
What the government did, in fact, was to issue a licence for a free school anywhere in the city of Salford. They did not at any time suggest that it be St George's, and that was the point of my question, to confirm that, in fact, that site has not been allocated by the government.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm sure you would agree that it wasn't appropriate for the government to make such an announcement during a by-election taking part in Salford. Because can I remind this council that government departments are also bound by the rules of PERDA as well as local government. So by implication, I'm afraid, and I'm not taking any more points of information because you already made it, but by implication, the government's department was getting involved in the Walton by-election. I was on my way back from Pembrokeshire, which is a very nice area, by the way, as I'm sure many members of this council will testify. Right, I was on my way back from Pembrokeshire when I was phoned by Neil Keeling, who'd already got details of the site that was being suggested. And there's been no denial by anybody that that was the site that was intended. And I made the point, and I think I would stand by that point, and I make no apologies for making that point, that the reality of the situation is that we do not want to see that site go for a secondary school. And in fact, right, the Academy has subsequently said, well, it doesn't have to be that site, which is hardly a denial that it's going to be that site. It doesn't have to be that site. It could perhaps be another site. The point I made, and I would have hoped that Councillor Garrido was joining me in condemning that, is here is a situation where a free school has had no consultation with us in terms of political involvement, has not actually taken account of the council's policy, which I'll come on to in answer to Councillor Critchley's point, and in fact the money has just been announced. Now the other thing I'm quite angry about is implying that the ward councillors did anything wrong. I fully support the leaflet that those ward councillors put out. It was entirely based on the press reports, despite the attempt of people to try and cover this up. It was entirely based on press reports. Having examined this, I discussed this with the city solicitor, who came to the conclusion that no breach of PERDA appeared to have taken place. And I prefer, because I've got the utmost respect for the city solicitor, to rely on her viewpoint rather than Councillor Gareed's point. So far from condemning the ward councillors, I salute them for trying to bring this to the attention of people. Now, if you think free schools are unpopular in that particular area, perhaps you ought to tell your government about that, how you felt that announcing a free school was a bit of a millstone around your neck during the election campaign. I happen to think that you lost that election because your party is unpopular generally, rather than that particular policy. Can I deal with the points that have been made? Because our policy on free schools is absolutely crystal clear. We don't approve of free schools. We want to see them all return to a partnership with the local authority along with academies. Right, that is the absolute policy which I believe in, and I will fight for when we get the inevitable Labour government. I think that the issue more is about how do we deal with the situation that we find ourselves in. I will not hold the children of Salford hostage to a particular doctrine in terms of this. The problem is that the government has held a gun to our head by saying you can only have a new school if it's either an academy or a free school. Now, I've said that if a free school comes forward who endorses the same principles of education that we do, who actually want to deal with the situation as we do, who actually want to deal with the local authority, I'm happy to talk to them. I've said I will be prepared to talk to this particular academy, but so far no meeting has been offered or taken place. Now, if that happens, I will talk to them, but I will want them to adhere to the principles that we believe in of equality of opportunity, of new chances for our children, and an exciting educational curriculum. Can I deal with the Chromebooks? Because I'm sorry, I don't accept the argument that just because we clerk the governing body, that we are responsible for every decision taken in that particular school. The reality of the situation is that under local management of schools, right, it is the responsibility of the school to decide what equipment is actually on offer in that particular school. The head teacher made a view. I've talked to some of the governors who feel that actually this never was properly, there was never any proper consultation that took place. If this had been drawn to my attention, I would have said that I don't think it's fair for parents to make any sort of substantial contribution to the education of their children. I certainly wouldn't have endorsed this particular scheme. And I think the Co-op Trust is absolutely right to say that they will not be endorsing it. So I think we need to work and try and get the best possible deal for the parents. But I absolutely reject the idea that we can reverse local management of schools and say, okay, we're going to take over the running of a particular school and dictate to that school what equipment it actually asks parents to provide. I don't agree with the decision. I would have hoped that the governing body would have been properly consulted, but we are where we are, and I think we're trying to find a solution to it without saying that we are somehow responsible for the decision made by an individual head teacher. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mary. I think I have to remind Council now we are, well, we're 30 seconds, I seem to like 30 seconds today, close to closing the meeting, unless this Council passes a motion to say they'd like an extension. Anybody second that? Okay, we have a 10-minute extension. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Reynolds.
So we need to vote.
Okay, can we have a show of hands then for those people in agreement with an extension of 10 minutes? All those for? All those against? The fours have it. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify some of the comments that Robin Garrido's made. My fellow ward councillors, we are all councillors now, been accused of saying that the government have agreed, approved and allocated a site. I've checked the letter numerous times. The words agreed, approved and allocated are not on that letter at all. We never used anything in the letter that wasn't out in the public. This was all from an article. I pride myself, and I know Councillor Critchley and Councillor Brooks do, in keeping residents up to date on things that are happening in their community, affecting them. I'm not bothered whether it's a government decision or a council decision. We produce a number of letters like this every single year. I might be as bold as to suggest that had the Conservative Party produced any update between losing the 2018 election and losing the 2019 election that wasn't an election address asking for votes, then maybe they would have been a bit more successful at the ballot station.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Robin Garrido.
Thanks, sir. Well, just to put Councillor Edwards correct, the opening sentence says, the government has announced that it intends to build a free school with capacity for 750 students on the site of the former St George's School on Parsonage Road. That is totally incorrect, Chair. The government has not announced that a free school is to be built on St George's site, and therefore that statement is incorrect, and that is why I asked Councillor Merry to agree that incorrect and misleading statements should not be made. The Star Academy Trust were telephoned the following day to ascertain what their situation was. They also confirmed that they had no intention yet of building a school on that site. In fact, they were looking at various sites and had not made any decision. I did actually ask the city solicitor for a ruling on that, but I was told that it was a political matter. Well, I'm raising it as a political matter now. The fact is, an incorrect statement was made. The government did not mention St George's, and Councillor Merry can go on as much as he likes and try and change the subject by talking about the benefits of free schools. That's not the issue here. The issue is 3 days before an election, an incorrect statement was made by 3 of our councillors sitting in this chamber. And that is wrong and should not happen, and the executive should actually take the start on that matter.
Mary, do you want to come back on that, please?
I'm afraid Councillor Garrido is also incorrect. Basically, Neil Keeling put the story together, and it was quite clear that there was no attempt to deny that this was the particular site chosen by this academy. There is no attempt to obscure it. The fact is that that is what the government intended to announce. It's absolutely crystal clear. Here is £600,000 or whatever it is to start the exploratory work in terms of this particular site. And incidentally, because it's the only site that potentially is available in that particular, and incidentally, what is even more outrageous is that we will be expected to provide this site at a peppercorn rent for this particular free school. I mean, that's what the legislation says. So basically, Councillor Garrido is trying to play fast and loose with the facts. I think what the ward councillors did, and that there is no evidence that they used anything other than what was already in the public domain. And he didn't want the public to know that that was the intention of the DFE, to create a new free school on that particular site. And I'm sorry, he did not want the public to know that. That's what the argument is about.
Thank you, Councillor Merry. Councillor Hines, any questions, any comments to Councillor Hines? Councillor Kelly, any comments, any questions? Councillor Lancaster, any questions, any comments? Councillor Andrews, any questions, any comments? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this short as I know we're already running out, but this issue is really important to the people that I represent. Since being elected last May, I visited all primary schools in Warden South and I've held question and answer sessions at each of the schools to at least all of the Key Stage 2 students. I encourage students in all the schools to hold me as their representative to account, which I'm pleased to say they're doing, which is why I'm asking this question today. One of the schools was James Brindley Primary School, where I spoke to lots of polite, charismatic students who are all full of brilliant ideas. Since this visit, the school council have lobbied me to support their campaign for a crossing on Newarth Road. I want to say here in council that I fully support their campaign. Newarth Road is a 30-mile-per-hour road, although the average speed far exceeds this, and the crossings at the loop line and a busy mini roundabout at the start and end of the road. The school is accessed from the centre of Newarth Road. The crossings are nowhere near the school. I can't believe there's not a crossing there already. The school council have informed me that they've surveyed the students and 90% of the pupils, that's 250 children, support the crossing, and 53% of the children currently walk to school. I'm sure we could increase this with a crossing. So I ask you, Councillor Antrobus, firstly, will you arrange a meeting with me as soon as possible to discuss this issue? And secondly, will you commit in this council to meeting the students at James Brindley Primary School to support their campaign? Thank you.
Councillor Antrobus. Any questions, any comments? Councillor Ferguson, any questions, any comments? Okay, that takes us on to item number 19, general questions and comments to the chairs of the different scrutiny committees. Any questions, David Jolly? Any questions, Adrian Brocklehurst? Yes, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I recently attended a meeting of the Together M44 Carers Group where I was warmly welcomed but grilled on support for parent carers in particular. And now, I'll cut this question short and just say some of the people that I met in that meeting were absolutely inspirational and absolutely unafraid to talk about the issues that they face, from lack of support to an individual care, which this story has since been put in the press, so I feel comfortable in saying, contacting 17 different care agencies to get the care package awarded by this council put in place for their child. So I want to thank members of the Children's Scrutiny Committee, and as the Chair, Councillor Brocklehurst in particular, for his and their support and commitment to having these important issues properly looked at in the near future at Children's Scrutiny. Please will you commit to, as Chair, Councillor Brocklehurst, to carers groups across the city, such as Carers at M44, being part of this process.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Brocklehurst, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'll keep it short as well. Yes, happy to commit to that. We have discussed it and agreed at Children's Scrutiny Panel. We've set up a scrutiny subgroup to look at this issue as a deep scrutiny issue. And I'm happy to say that my colleague, Councillor Edwards, will chair that scrutiny subgroup and manage it, and we will absolutely commit to engaging fully with young carers and young carers groups, including such groups as Together at M44, the detail of which, of course, will be worked through with the scrutiny chair, scrutiny subgroup chair, Councillor Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brocklehurst. Councillor Birch, any questions, comments? Yeah. Councillor Morris, any questions or comments? And Councillor Lewis, any questions or comments? Fantastic. That takes us on to item 21, the schedule reports. These are for information only. And the information there, if you need to ask any question, then speak to the persons that are responsible outside of this meeting. I've just been reminded I haven't done another one. Item 20. Item 20 is Any questions or comments on the discharge of duties for outside bodies? And for that we have Councillor Bellamy. Any questions, responses? Councillor Gina Reynolds again.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, it's just a general
Just that.
comments to
Okay.
any of those members who are on outside bodies.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any comments to those?
Okay. Any questions or responses?
No.
Nope.
So now 21 for noting.
The schedule reports, as I was saying, that they're just for note. Any questions can be taken back to the persons responsible outside of this meeting. And with that, I'd like to close the council meeting. I did have miss 20.
It's because it's